Hello everyone and welcome to Mappers episode number 7 we're already on now. I of course am going to be the host of the show, Nursky, and then joining me going to be 3 guys with a little bit of a change up here today as our normal guest ESV Superwoman and of course ESV's Iron Man is going to be on the show, but then from the Planetary Workshop we're going to have Archville filling in for the absent Prodigy today. How is it going for everybody?
It's doing good. Doing good. I got my full nutrition this morning.
You got your full nutrition? Dude, I've had a crazy week. Got a test.
I had one apple.
One apple?
And I'm good to go. Well, one apple a day keeps the doctor away, so.
Yeah, I mean, should work, right? Theoretically. In theory, that apple will keep the doctor away. Of course, guys, we're going to have a full show for you today. We're going to be discussing a little bit about Map of the Month, where it's at, where it's been, where hopefully people are going to want it to be going. We're going to be talking a little bit about the different styles of mapping, whether it's 2-player maps, 3-player maps, 4-player maps. Kind of discussing just a little bit about the differences between the styles of going with a map, what's good or bad about them, and you know what tends to be the preference of our map designers. We're going to wrap up the show, our last topic today. We're going to talk a little bit about 2v2 maps. Why there hasn't been much progress in that kind of part of the community. There is a community that definitely likes to play team games, but one of the number one complaints, of course, is always the 2v2 maps. Not a lot of attention is spent there, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And then, of course, at the end of the show today, we will have our normal Q&A, and then shout-outs and closing for all of our hosts on the show. And then, of course, though, before we start the show, I want to just extend a special thank you to Archville for filling in here for the missing Prodigy. Prodigy had some stuff he had to do in the real world today, so Prodigy not going to be with us. And then Super, of course, he got to go laughing about it. But, you know, guys, I kind of want to just move straight into our first topic of the day. We're going to be talking a little bit about Map of the Month. I'm actually going to bring up onto the screen the current Map of the Month thread for April, which had the voting for all the different maps. It looks like ESV's Afterglow by Monitor ended up getting the highest amount of rating because they do rate the maps on a scale of 1 to 10. Of course, 1 being a terrible map that should have never made it, and then, of course, 10 being the best possible map. Also had ESV's Tazanite in here by Time Twister. And then finally, last but not least, we had TPW's Peaks of Alamar by WRL that ended up finishing 3rd place. Now, I know this is kind of a hotly debated topic a little bit about the Map of the Month, where it's been and where it's going. Is there anybody who actually wants to just volunteer to give a little bit of background info on Map of the Month for the viewers at home, or otherwise I can handle it? Deafening
Not
silence. Alright. So, I guess I'll talk about it a little bit for the viewers at home, just so that they have a little bit of an overview. Essentially, if you guys actually went to the Wikipedia and looked it up, Map of the Month started out as something where they actually had a tournament that was played on some of these maps every month. And there was, I believe, a rough association with the ESL, I want to say? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
Where the winning map would be used in some of their tournaments and such forth. So that was basically how it got started. I believe it made it 9 weeks before a lot of that aspect of it ended up dropping off. And they've still had Map of the Month contests where a map is chosen as the winner, but a lot of that extra benefits to it has kind of dropped to the wayside. There's not the tournament anymore. As far as I know, the ESL association with them using the map for sure is gone now. So it's been kind of an adjustment to where it's done now. They did post in this Map of the Month thread that the people who run Map of the Month are looking at reorganizing it, but I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on Map of the Month, like what it's meant for you guys as mappers when it first came out, and where you guys would like to see it go in the future to be relevant to what you guys do on a daily basis, creating maps for the community, and more importantly, in that competitive scene.
You know, honestly, I really like Map of the Month, but it's kind of when iGroak used to organize it, he would set up tournaments for it, and you know, get players like Firebat or Poke Bunny or you know those types of players to play in the tournament, and sometimes those maps would go somewhere, but not necessarily. And then they kind of got into the whole ESL IEM deal where it's like, oh, you know, the winning map will go to IEM map pool. And it's like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. That gives us something to aim for because getting a map exposure as a map maker is one of the hardest things even today still. So anything that allows exposure for a map will get our attention. So, but I think as time has gone on, it's kind of been dumbed down quite a bit because people, for whatever reason, they just don't. There's no real reward anymore in it. It's more of like, well, okay, this is the best map, and if you don't make it, learn from your mistakes and keep making maps. We'll tell you what's wrong with your map, but this is how you have to just learn about it now. It's like, it's not really a tournament anymore. It's like, well, here are the best maps. This is what's wrong with yours. Now improve. There's just not really any reason to join Map of the Month unless you want like hardcore analysis of your map. But it's just, I don't know, it's not as special as it used to be, I would say. I mean, there hasn't been a tournament on Map of the Month for a little while, actually, as far as I recall.
The deal with ESL was quite cool because it has a lot of potential. Because ultimately, the map would be in IM, but it took a bit too much time, and IM passed before the Map of the Month, the winter was finished. So there are some potential, and maybe there will be more occasions like this in the future to for Map of the Month to shine more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was kind of, we wanted to go big with ESL, and somehow it didn't work out as intended.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where it went wrong, but it kind of collapsed, the teamwork. So we're kind of at the stage where we're trying to start over. So for now, it's just about having it running.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, which, I mean, there's something to said in it be running, because at least that gives maybe an opportunity for some of the lesser-known mappers to have at least a platform they can get their map featured if they do a really good job of it. So I guess there is that upside to it. But I can't help but ask, where would you guys like to see this actually go? I mean, for you guys, does it matter with where you guys are at, since all of you are part of like a map-making team and you guys are trying to develop, you know, connections with the organizations and stuff with your individual teams? Or is this something that you guys feel like you'd like to see come back and change and have meaning to it? Like, would that matter to you guys? Or at this point, for a lot of map makers, is the Map of the Month even really still relevant?
You know, I think Map of the Month is definitely a good launching pad for map makers, new and veteran alike. New map makers can put a map in there and have a chance at it, you know. Because, like I said earlier, getting exposure for your map is very difficult, and as a new map maker, you just don't have the resources to do that. So where do you start as a new map maker? Map of the Month. That's a really good start. So I think Map of the Month actually has a lot more potential than it does right now, simply because in the last few months, foreign map making has some major clutch hits with the Team Liquid map contest, getting maps in the GSL and the ladder. And so that gives map makers a lot more motivation to strive to make maps, and I think Map of the Month can definitely improve drastically from that, you know, particular area, whether it's letting go of map maker only judges and getting some players involved, or actually hosting tournaments, or you just getting a contact with a major tournament and saying, hey, you know, there's these really great maps, you can choose one if you really want. I mean, right now it's basically all map making, that's all it is. Like, there's really no prize with it. It's just all the judges are map makers, and it's like, that's basically it. So I think Map of the Month definitely could be much, much better after what's been happening for the last few months.
Absolutely, I agree with that. But for now, I still think that it's an important motivation for the mappers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the main thing that it is right now. What we wanted to be is a lot more. And I think we will be heading for a lot more. We had a recent change in who's running it. It used to be Monitor, now it's Lifix.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying something. We're as I said before, we're in a stage of, well, where do we go from here, right?
Yeah, because I mean, obviously you have it right now, and it's still running, but obviously it needs to have more meaning to it, right? So how do you add that extra meaning?
Mm-hmm.
Which is really what I wanted to ask you guys. I mean, like, what is going to make this thing a viable, like, man, I really feel good about being the map of the month winner versus for a lot of people, I think the focus has shifted a little bit because, I mean, like, TPW's had stuff going on with NASL. ESV, of course, has the ESV TV connection, and then along with some of the ladder stuff, along with some of the other tournaments that have been featuring some of those maps. And, like, it seems like that emphasis has gone a little bit away from where it started with that map of the month stuff, whereas, like, that was the way to really get your map recognized and played on, and there's a lot of other avenues now. So I'm just, like, I'm thinking, like, because I think it was a great thing. You know, I used to keep track of what map would win, especially being somebody who played the game a lot when it first came out and hating a lot of Blizzard's initial maps. You know, when we were playing on Steps of War and you see this map of the month stuff going on and you see some good ideas there, it definitely makes you feel better potentially for the future of the game when you're playing on some kind of bad maps when the game was first released. So I'm just like, I guess I'm just wondering if you're going to make it relevant again. I mean, does there have to be some kind of a award or lead-in for the newer map maker for it to actually be really, really useful past, like you guys were saying some of, which is where it's like you get some great analysis, you get a little bit of recognition for your work, but it's not going to mean much unless something happens with it, right?
Yeah, there definitely has to be a reward. Because if you look at the fewer resources per base by Baron, no one would join that tournament unless there was the $200 prize. Like, because, you know, with Gonzi, there was no way he would try that if there wasn't money involved. Because, like, players don't get involved in something that's not popular. So you need to have some kind of a prize pool. If it's not money, then it's definitely like, oh, you get a spot in this tournament. Or you get your map featured for, you know, one season in, you know, this tournament over here or something like that. Because prizes are what bring people to the table. And even though we do maps for free, like, we have to get something out of it. And even today, after doing so much spotlight on foreign map making for the last few months, like, now it's time to start getting a little more recognition for the things that foreign map makers do.
I don't think that map makers need, like, a reward. Like, we had the Intel rewards, and that's nice and all, but I don't think that's what it's going to be about. It's all about getting your map out. That is what is important.
Well, I guess the question would be is with how things have moved in the scene, right? Towards where there's a lot of people who are starting to form map-making teams and stuff, and those map-making teams have associations with other places that get their maps out there. I mean, should there maybe be more of an emphasis by Map of the Month to not really necessarily focus on the maps necessarily being designed by teams of people who are already with teams? They're going to get their maps out there via these other organizations they're partnered with? I mean, should the Map of the Month organizers with Lefix in them potentially consider taking the maps of people who have teams who are going to be able to get their map out there already, right? And maybe focus more on the people who don't have those teams and organizations? I mean, should it become more of maybe a pro-am type of thing, you know what I'm saying, where you focus a little bit more on map makers who don't have teams and such forth to already get their map out there? Or do you still want to have those teams? Because, I mean, an ESV team member, for instance, like with ESV Afterglow by Monitor, winning the Map of the Month, I mean, obviously Monitor's not going to mind winning, but does he really need that exposure versus somebody else who's not part of those type of teams? So should there be a refocusing of Map of the Month on the map makers who don't have those outlets already, or should it stay like it is? Because I question whether or not it's going to mean as much to Monitor to win Map of the Month as it would for some guy who doesn't have all that already.
Okay.
I think it means a lot to the teams as well, and I think it was we did talk about it at some point during after a Map of the Month, the usual drama thread, about teamless rewards, and we kind of agreed that it didn't really mean a lot. It wasn't really the best maps because it was like sorted out, and then it didn't really mean anything if you left out the teams. So we kind of agreed that that wasn't the approach, and yeah, I think it means a lot. It meant a lot to me winning February, and I'm sure it means a lot to Monitor as well. I couldn't imagine that it didn't.
Yeah. You know, to be honest, like even though Map of the Month has been kind of, you know, there's been a lot of talk in the map community where it's like it doesn't even matter if you win or lose in Map of the Month. Like it's just a way to improve. But the thing is if you get in the top 5, that's just a little bit of a merit for that map, and that actually does give it slight potential. If you go up to MLG and say like, well, this map got first place in the map contest, then that's better than if you had not gotten first place and it's like a fresh map, you know?
Right. So the question wouldn't really be so much is it relevant. The question would just be could it potentially be more relevant for the map makers? I guess would be a better way to look at it. Is you guys definitely like the fact that you get the recognition of it, but it wouldn't hurt if it had some of that previous glory that it used to have with the ESL and the tournament that was played on the Map of the Month submissions and such forth.
The other thing too is that I think Map of the Month needs to start doing different subcategories. Like for 1 month, it's hey, most creative map or most technical map, and then the next month, most playable map, or you know, just stuff like that. It's like, or have a month that's veterans only or new map makers only. Like give people a chance. Like. Because honestly, if you're putting up new map makers against ESV and TPW, like, what are the chances that your map is actually going to get in the top 5 if you're not on one of those teams? Like, it's very low, and that's just a brutal honesty right there. Like, when you have a team, it's all about collaboration. When you put 10 map makers into one map, you just get a really good map. That's just the way it is. So I think that, well, it's good for teams. Like it needs to be available and accessible for newer map makers because they're going to make a map and submit it, and it's not going to go anywhere. So you need to have a way to give them some merit as well, because you know what, it's not going to last. We're not going to have very many map makers left if that's just the way it is. Like people are just going to be like, well, I can't.
Get stagnant.
Yeah, people are going to be like, well, I can never get on TPW or ESV, so what's the point in map making anymore? Like, it's only their maps. Like, that's the attitude that's going to go around eventually, so we have to make it easy for them.
Yeah, which is partially why I asked that question, like, maybe should there be a focus on some of the people who aren't on teams and stuff already? Because obviously, while you guys might like the recognition still, you don't need it quite as much as your new map maker or somebody else is going to need. So, I mean, I think you got a good idea there, potentially, with the fact that maybe it can become more useful by varying it up every now and then, instead of just taking whatever happens to be what everybody would consider the greatest new map of the month. Maybe sometime you do limit it to non-teamed map designers, or maybe sometimes you do limit it to a creative process. I know one of the topics we're going to be talking about a little bit later in the show is going to be the 2v2 scene from a mapping perspective. You know, if a map of the month was there for 2v2 maps for 1 month, maybe you'd get some refocusing on some of the 2v2 maps for a month so that somebody could try and create the best 2v2 map. A little bit of a guest appearance there, it looks like, by Iron Man's mom, I'm going to guess. Poor Travis. But anyways,
because you walked in.
Problem.
So I think I think it would definitely be Iron Mom. There you go. I like that one. Matthew Mega in the chat saying hi, Iron Mom. I love that one. That was a good one. She'll forever be Iron Mom. She ever plays video games, you're gonna have to go with Iron Mom now for her handle.
Oh my, this is all red beat right now.
Getting a little bit back on topic after our guest appearance there. So I think at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that Map of the Month is not necessarily bad. It's a good thing. So we can establish that. It was nice when it had some perks and benefits, so it'd be nice if some of those perks and benefits could come back. And it wouldn't hurt if there could be ways to, even if it's not Map of the Month, in my opinion, actually just thinking about it, but find ways to facilitate some of the newer mappers to be able to get exposure in the community so that you can keep that inflow of fresh blood so that you don't get stagnant where Archville, Super Ooman, and Iron Man are the last mappers in the world because all of their maps go on to the ladder. Like, that'd be great for them, obviously. But for the scene in general, eventually one of these guys might stop doing it, or God forbid something tragic happens and they can't make maps anymore because their hand fell off randomly. Like, like you still need that new blood so that hopefully you can plus, I mean, I think in some respects, ideas can get stagnant after a while if you don't have that infusion of new blood every now and then.
Yeah, I would like to answer that actually, because that's actually the situation in the Planetary Workshop at the moment. Is that many of the original members are hardly making maps anymore, and we are looking for new blood. And I think it was Iron Man who said the other day on Skype that, well, aren't you 15 members already? Why are you looking for new members? Because, well, I think we're like 5 active members at the moment. And, yeah, we're looking for fresh blood. And I think that Map of the Month is definitely one of the ways to do it. And it's a great way for new map makers to get exposure. And definitely we should have more focus on that. But I think you can really make it exclusive for new guys. It would kind of lose its meaning if you took out the map making teams. Then you're not picking the best maps anymore. Now you're just picking the best maps of some group of people. So that could be like a up-and-comer reward for people who have never been in the top 5 before. Maybe expand the top 5 to a top 10 so that there are more maps, more people involved. That might be a little bit hard for the judges to find 10 maps instead of 5, but
or maybe even categorize winners, right? You could even do that too, where it's like, here's the most creative winner, here's the just best overall winner, here's the best new non-teamed member winner for the month. Maybe even just expand it to a larger thing.
Wow, that's actually...
The only problem with that is that it's going to be extra hard on the judges. I mean, I think they are over their heads already, but it would definitely add something.
That's actually better because, wow, I can't believe none of us even thought of that. Usually the
That's
awards
what I'm here
we get
for, man.
from
Think outside the box from you guys.
Well,
keep going.
Well, the awards we get are like they're pretty epic, but they're like pointless. Like, what do you get? What do you get out of it? You know,
right.
It's like the Dustin Browder Award for the most rocks. It's like, okay, like, all right, cool, but like, there's no reason for it. I think the other thing that actually will help is getting player casters, because you know what? The judges that we usually get for Map of the Month, they say they don't show biasm because, well, you know, we have one member of each team. We don't submit our own maps, and oh yeah, we don't pick our own teammates as maps. Like, okay, that's clearly not showing biasm, but you have biasm of opinion. That's the other thing that's never going to go away. It's like, well, I like jungle maps, so I'm going to pick a jungle map every single month. And you're going to have to deal with it. I'm a judge, and you just have to suck it up.
Deal with it.
Like, that's my opinion. I like those green, lush maps, so I'm going to look at those. Like, that's just the way I am. So,
right, which you can't really avoid. With
others are like, well, I like hard thirds. Like, I like bases that are hard to tape, so I don't want to get those standard boring ones. It's like, you know, it's like you get the map maker biasm, and that's the problem. That's the problem. That's the one thing that is going to affect Map of the Month negatively. That's why I think we should get players in there who look at the maps and say, you know what, it looks pretty, but I like the way it plays out.
Well,
because as a Protoss player, this would work, and so forth.
Well, I think, I mean, even past that, potentially going off your idea, I mean, there's a lot of other things you can potentially do with that, right? I mean, obviously you can, if you have, say, Map of the Month has 5 judges, you know, you could be like, well, here's the overall pick. This is the one that got the best average score. But then, you know, while the judges are judging these maps in the first place, I don't think it'd be over the top difficult to have even 1 or 2 other categories that maybe, I mean, if you're ranking the map on specific things, right, like different types of categories, like how the judges feel about the balance of the map, how they feel about the aesthetics of the map, how they feel about, I mean, obviously you would have the numbers already there for which map was the most aesthetically pleasing to the judges, which map was the most balanced or whatever to the judges, you know, and this was the guy who got the highest rating who's not part of a team. And I think it wouldn't be as hard to extend some of the awards you give to people if you use some of the criteria you're already using to determine which map is going to win. If that makes sense to you guys. I think if you don't try and make it overly complicated, where it's like, okay, now I've looked at all the maps, and this is the map I think is the best, but now I have to look for the most creative map and rejudge it all over again. Like, rather than creating all the extra work, a lot of that should inherently be built into just judging in the first place, so why not just take some of those results and just quantify them into, well, we're going to recognize this as the best overall map, and these are their top 5 best overall maps. And here's some special mentions for the map that got the highest aesthetic score, the highest creative score, and this guy was the highest scoring guy who wasn't part of a team and wasn't in the top 5.
Yeah.
I
I might even rethink having a first, second, or third place even. Because it's like, okay, first place, it's like, well, people are always going to disagree with that. I would think that instead of first, second, third, just take those 3 maps and just say the top 3. Or, well, I guess that's kind of the same, but just like, these are the most favorited 5 maps. Instead of first, second, third, like, well, this one's better than that one. Because it's like I said, there's bias of opinion. That's just the way the world is, so I think it's better to just generalize everything and put it all in just one dish and say, you know what, these are the best maps we picked, congratulations, you're all winners, and then, you know, just say like, well, this one's the most aesthetically pleasing, and then this one's has the best or most technical layout, or
talking about
like
what the judges think of the maps would be kind of nice, I think, for the Map of the Month thread. Because like, you look at the Map of the Month thread now, and it's like, here's the ratings, it's 7.7 out of 10. But I have no idea why it's a 7.7 out of 10, right?
Yeah.
Like, I see Afterglow, it's got 7.7 out of 10, but why is it? Was it the most balanced map? Was it the best looking map? I mean, what were the, like, it'd be nice to see how some of these maps score out, and like a little bit of an opinion from the judges about the maps to kind of add to it, you know?
I posted like 3 times in the thread, like, can I get opinions on why these maps were chosen? Can I get opinions on why my map didn't make it? And like, people are just not saying anything. And
maybe some things they could work on in the future.
This month kind of sucks, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I don't care if my map makes it or not. It just sucks because there's like no info. It's like, well, here's Afterglow, 7.7 out of 10. Cool. Why was it chosen? It's not being answered. It's like, I think.
And I mean, I think there is some understanding that it does take a lot of work to obviously do something like this. So I mean, I think it's worth noting that, I mean, the more constraints you put on the judging and stuff, the more difficult and time-consuming it would be for a judge. But I mean, if you're gonna run a contest, in my opinion, like, do it right or don't do it at all. You know, is just my personal preference. Like, just doing it but not really having much attached to it, to me, doesn't mean nearly as much as trying to do it right if you can. And like, if judges don't have time to give opinions, maybe you find new judges. I don't know. I don't know where the answer is necessarily there, because obviously you want to try and incentivize the judges to waste all this time judging, but at the same time, you want the results of it to be meaningful past just bragging rights, obviously. So it's like, it's hard to get that balance.
Yeah, I would say though that it's not like it's randomly picked. It is very meaningful, even though it's not very transparent in that regard. Right. They are spending so much time on getting the right maps, and there was a reason behind it. And I had several of the judges on my team, and the first thing I did was to ask why this map number 1, and I did get an explanation, but there was no explanation in the thread, even though there actually was a good explanation to it.
Right, and that'd be nice to see in the thread.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think definitely for the top 5, brief, at least a brief description of why this map. And I think we used to have that in the previous month. Before we kind of went to this point where we were like starting over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See if I
Yeah,
can
there was
look it
a
up.
brief description. I think about. So yeah, it was. But at the same time, people are looking for like just description of all the maps, and then it's becoming
that's
really
not
really
practical.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously
Um,
giving a point about like every single map submitted probably wouldn't be practical. But at least like I think having the winners have like, well, this map was chosen and but like I said, I think it'd be cool to expand it towards like having some couple of extra dividends there to really promote map makers, I feel like. Where it's like, well, this is the best 2v2 map that was submitted. This is the best
Yeah.
non-teamed mapmaker map that was submitted, and give those guys some spotlight for what they've contributed, even if maybe in the overall their map wasn't considered the best map that was in it.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, guys, I think we've spent quite a bit of time on Map of the Month, so we're going to head away from Map of the Month. So we're going to take a really, really short break, guys, for everybody tuning in and viewing. Keep thinking of your questions, and if you do have questions to post, keep them in mind throughout the course of the show, because we will obviously take your questions towards the end of the show, but scrolling up through a ton of chats is really difficult, so try and save them and or tweet them. You can tweet them at GoForNursky. I've actually switched my Twitter around now. It doesn't say VP Nursky now. It's GoForNursky. So you can tweet them at me throughout the course of the show or save them for the end of the show to put in chat. But we're going to take a really quick break, guys, and when we come back, we will be talking about the different styles of map as far as the player count goes on the maps and what's the positives, negatives towards making a 2-player map versus a 3-player map versus the 4-player maps and all the different little nuances that go with that. So more mappers coming back in just a moment, guys, so stay tuned.
Why do I see Travis 2 times?
I just muted you, and yes, Travis just joined the call twice. What the heck is going on with that? Alrighty, everyone. Hello, and back to Mappers, as we are on episode number 7. Of course, my little thing getting in the way here for just a second. Bring that out of the way. And then we have, of course, our special guest from TPW, Archfield, joining us to film for Prodigy today, and then our normal host of Iron Man and Superhuman, who gets a little testy when you call it Superhuman. So I suggest that everybody in the community from now on spell his name Superhuman, because he loves it.
No, woman, like a dragoon.
But we're going to be moving on to our next topic now, as we're going to go into a little bit of the different styles of maps, and specifically, because I'm trying to slowly over time here narrow down some of these topics when we're talking about maps, a little bit further away from the generalities, a little bit closer to specifics for map designers, of the nuanced differences of some of the map making. Some of the things that your average map maker who maybe hasn't been part of a team or is just getting started may not actually even realize when they go to make a map, the differences they're going to be running into and some of the trials and tribulations that go along with that. So for topic 2 today, we are moving in to talking about the differences between making 2-player maps, making 3-player maps, and 4-player maps. And by 2-player, 3-player, and 4-player maps, I'm specifically talking about the number of spawning positions you're creating when you build a map. And talking about which ones that people tend to prefer, which ones are more interesting for you guys to make, and then what are the challenges in each of the different types of maps that you guys are creating. I already got somebody posting in the chat that 3-player maps are impossible, and I hate to say that.
Impossible, not impossible.
So what are some of you guys' opinions on the different styles of spawning numbers you guys can actually make with maps?
I'm not even going to make a 3-player map. I'm staying the hell away from that.
Yeah, I tried that once, never again.
I guess the question would be why. What's difficult about the 3-player maps that you guys tend to avoid them?
I can't even set up the mains. It's like impossible, man. I can set up 2, maybe like 1.5, but then I can't I can't put 3 and then call it symmetrical, or not symmetrical, but like, you know, even amount of space. I don't know, it's just really weird. I can't do it.
The thing about 2- and 4-player maps is that we copy-paste everything. Yeah. We can't do that with 3-player maps. You can't copy-paste a 3-player map.
All by hand.
Could you copy-paste them in a pie shape? You like a marquee tool.
Yeah, you would need something like that, but we only got the square. Copy-paste.
So I would think technically, just thinking from a mathematical perspective, right, disregarding all the other potential challenges with the Galaxy editor and stuff, theoretically, if you want to make a 3-player map, you could create a pie that's 33% of the map, and then just translate that across the other 33% sections of the map, assuming you were dealing with something that was more or less a square, to keep things equidistant.
Yeah, but copying and pasting would be really hard. Because you can't rotate 33 or 45 degrees or whatever it is. Like, you have to do everything by hand. That's the problem.
So, is that something that's partially a limitation of the Galaxy editor that prevents you guys from really going into the 3-player scenes, would you say?
Yes.
You guys are just lazy.
Lazy.
It's not laziness, you can't do it!
It's impossible, right?
One thing is that it's very difficult. The other thing is, compared to how difficult it is, it's not very rewarding. You're not getting any kind of exciting gameplay that you wouldn't get from a 4-player map, for example. But it's 10 times harder. You would get something different, but it's not worth the trouble, in my opinion.
Also, some layouts can only work only on a very specific number of players. Like back in the beta, I made the map Triforce, and that map it doesn't work well with 2-player maps or 4-player maps. It only works with 3-player maps. So I'm kind of forced with of making a 3-player map if I want to do such layout. And then with 2-player maps, you have more freedom of the layout
Yeah.
because you have just two mains, and then you can do what you want all over the map. In 4-player maps, you have like you have one main and one layout and you copy it 3 more times. So it has a lot more restrictions.
I think
And,
team.
and for 3-player maps, they're not impossible because you can use decals to make a template. Like you can divide it. You use straight lines with decals, and so you can make the symmetry by hand. But it takes time, but it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, as it is, if I looked at the StarCraft 2 map and custom forums on TL right now, there's like one 3-player map up there. It's actually an FRB map that somebody named Venti made. And it's really plain, but he did manage to do it. So it's obviously within the realm of possibility, but I mean, essentially what you guys are saying from your point of view, tools-wise, it's just so difficult right now that it's just easier to stay away from it in a lot of perspectives, rather than to try and tackle it. But I can't help but wonder, should somebody tackle it? I mean, in a way, then I'd assume as map makers there'd be some sort of a respect level for somebody who can pull it off and pull it off well.
I saw one guy. This was like months ago. He tried to do it, and I think the way he did it was he drew it out on paper, and then he somehow imported that drawing onto the map and overlaid it on the editor, and then just drew over it. But like, I don't even know how to do that. Like, that's kind of ridiculous. So that's one way.
You use a special, but you create a doodad with texture of your drawing or something like that. And then you place the doodad somewhere on the map, and then you can use it's like a decal doodad but with a drawing. I never used that technique. And I also don't thought like this because when you draw, you can do many mistakes of proportion. So
Yeah, but yeah, that's the other thing too. You'd have to measure a lot, probably with a ruler, if you're going to draw it out in advance. Try to make sure things are correct distances in scale, I suppose. So I guess the question would be, obviously with 3-player maps being very difficult and essentially impossible, as you guys are pointing out, what would you say are the varying differences between going with 2-player and 4-player starting position maps? I mean, is there a vast difference for you guys in how you create those maps and your preferences in regards to those? Or
the thing I find a little bit difficult about 4-player maps is that you have 3 things you need to combine. It's racial balance, positional balance, and creativity. And it's really hard to get creative if you have to keep in mind that all spawns have to be balanced, no matter how you spawn. And that's the problem with most 4-player maps. It really limits your creativity, and it's really difficult. It can't be pulled off. And I actually have a lot of respect for mappers who make 4-player maps. I don't do it myself. Haven't had the best of luck with it. But it's really difficult to be creative while balancing the map. That's the main difficulty about the map. The upside of creating a 4-player map is that you get this. You can't predict beforehand how the game is going to go because you don't know where the enemy is spawning. So you get this variable as an upside to the more difficult approach to making the map.
Yeah. So overall, with you guys, so I mean, what are you other two's preferences? I'm kind of curious when it comes to 2-player and 4-player maps. Do either you, Super Uman, or you, Iron Man, have a preference when it comes to 2-player and 4-player maps, aside from doing one of those two because then you can actually copy paste?
No, I don't know. Like, a lot of the I gotta give credit to a lot of the map makers who say that, you know, a lot of 2-player and 4-player maps are just becoming very stale, it's too generic. Like, what can you do? I mean, there's been hundreds of maps that have been made since the release. It's like you can't, like, what do you do? Like, you can't somehow magically design something that's completely unnatural because people won't want to play it. And I don't know, it's like you get to a point where it's like you need another expansion, or you need to somehow have a giant metagame shift in order to start designing something new and unique. Otherwise, it's like you kind of just have to go with the norm. You're stuck with it. It's like there's really nothing you can do about it. And so when we make a map, we think it's good and it looks pretty, but it's, well, we have that generic 4-base layout, and it's like, well, where else are we supposed to put it? If I put it like this, it's going to look like this map. If I put it like that, it's going to look like this map. So it's like, there's really not a whole lot we can do as far as being creative with maps.
Testbug is the 3-map master. That map was created by who?
No, the Testbug was a Brooder map maker, and the bad guy was a 3-player map master.
Who was that created Testbug? I wasn't 100% sure what his name was off the top of my head.
But Testbug was a map maker in Brooder.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
And I named a map after him.
Right. I was trying to give you credit for creating Testbug.
Oh.
When I was saying who created Testbug?
Yeah, I know.
But Testbug's actually a perfect example of, while it's not still used in tournaments, I mean, for a while it was actually considered a really good 3-player map.
It was like the only 3-player map.
Yeah, pretty much it was the only 3-player map that was in existence. I'm actually bringing it up on the screen in case anybody potentially has not seen Testbug before, because I'm sure there might be somebody out there who hasn't. Testbug was pretty crazy, I have to admit, with just the change in scenery, let alone the fact that it was actually a 3-player map. You got like lava on one side, you got space theme on another, and then it's like a jungle water, and it somehow all actually coalesced together in a way that made sense. So that map was actually I gotta be honest, for a while, aesthetically speaking even, that was one of my favorite maps for quite some time.
Oh, those rush distances.
They definitely did vary depending on how the players spawned out a little bit, as far as how the map would play out. Just a skosh.
Oh, man.
But I mean, overall, I thought it was a pretty good attempt at that 3-player mapping scenario. I mean, now, with the 2-player maps, I mean, I know Archville was saying that he finds those to be the maps that are easiest to be the most creative on, because you're not bound by having to think about, oh, how close am I making the close spawns and such forth. Would you guys say definitely from a creative standpoint you prefer the 2-player maps over the 3- and 4-player maps because of the difficulty of the 3-player and then the balance issues that come with the 4-player maps? Because I've definitely been seeing a lot of 2-player maps, I feel like, recently have been coming out of the mapping community. And for a while I kind of felt like it might have been a little bit more related to just potentially easier to balance a 2-player map. But I mean, I think there's a good point to be made in the fact that you guys are saying, creatively speaking, for you as map makers, you guys feel a lot more creative with what you can do with a 2-player map versus a 4-player map.
Yeah. It's hard to be creative when you have to basically have a generic base layout, because that's all people look at. It's like, oh, well, the third looks really easy to take, but it looks really hard to wall off on its alternative path. It's like, you can't be creative with a generic base layout, and you can't create an abnormal base layout because it might lead to circle syndrome, or it's just like you just can't be creative with these generic base layouts, and that's the problem. That's where fist meets the face right there. Like,
right.
That's the roadblock. You want to be creative, but the base layout is like 90% of it. So,
yeah.
Someone else talk. It's not always me.
It's the Iron Man show right now. No, I think that's a pretty good point that you're making there. I mean, if you even look at the going back to when we were talking about the map of the month submissions, right? Like, the top 3 maps are 2-player maps. They're not 4-player spawn position maps, and they have some very creative things on them. You get to the only map submission that I think that was in the entire thread in the top 5 that was actually a 4-player map, and it's got a much more generic look to it. And I think that kind of goes back to what you guys were saying about the difficulty in creating a 4-player map, is that you have all these external worries, so you end up having to kind of dumb down the creativity level of the map quite a bit. Now, would you guys say that you're going to see a trend towards a lot of the maps just being 2v2 then in the future, so you guys can be more creative?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So I guess the point for an aspiring map maker would be, if you want to create something new, that if you guys had to recommend anything, you'd probably recommend they start with a 2-player map so that they can be a little creative and not have to worry as much about the balance issues.
At least until Heart of the Swarm. Right now, I feel like we are very restricted in what we can do and what we can't do in maps. Hopefully, we'll see some changes in that.
Yeah, because Heart of the Swarm definitely could change up things as far as the balance goes between those close spawns, close air, and cross-position type of games. If static defense is a little bit better for all the races all around, that eliminates a little bit of your balance issues with like close spawn distances and such forth, then I'd assume that make it a little bit easier for you guys as map makers to expand into some of those other realms, or maybe like a pie cutting feature so that you guys can create 3-player maps more easily.
Man,
I don't see that one coming though.
You know what would be cool if there was like some cool little feature in it where it's like, okay, I want to start a 3-player map, and then it comes up with like just a third, and then you design that, and then you use the engine or tool, and it automatically rotates it for you, so you get a perfect pie map. I would love to see that, but that's never going to happen, because you know Blizzard, they don't care. They don't even support the editor.
Well, maybe one of them will watch the show VOD, and like they'll be like, hey, he's got a good point there. We need a pie cutting tool now. And then maybe you'll get it in the Heart of Swarm. I mean, it couldn't be that hard to add to the editor, I would think. Right?
Nah. No, it's pretty hard. I'm not even a programmer, and I know that programming is quite hard. It's not
But
just
if you
like...
could program a box, you'd think you could program a pie.
It's not just like there's a Dropbox list, and then you just check it and say, okay, and then it gets added. It's like, it's a lot of programming.
Hey, if I can cut out stars with Photoshop, a pie has to be possible with the Galaxy Map Editor. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I think the problem would be though with RAMs and stuff. We only have to be 45 degrees, and when we start probably pasting 33 degrees, and things get messed up a bit.
Yeah, potentially could run into some issues there. Anyways, guys, we're going to actually move into our next topic in just a second. I'm going to take a very, very, very brief break before we do, but we're going to move into our last topic of the day, which is going to be a briefer topic before we move into the Q&A section for you guys, the audience at home. So make sure you guys are starting to post your questions, because we're going to be very briefly going over the next topic, and then we'll be moving into Q&A, and then, of course, our closing and shout-outs for the day, guys. So we'll be right back in just a second. So stay tuned, more mappers coming to you guys in a moment. welcome back, everybody, to Mappers episode number 7, as we are talking a little bit about more map-making topics once again today. And I just want to take this brief moment before moving to our last topic of the day, that if anybody viewing at home wants us to talk about a particular topic and it's something we might be able to use, make sure you actually check out the Team Liquid thread and post all your ideas and suggestions there, because that's where I'm going to get them from you guys. And then, if also as well, if you guys have questions for today, feel free to start posting them in chat now as we go on to our last topic of the day, which we're going to be moving into 2v2 maps. And I bring up this topic because this is a little bit personal to me, having cast for the 2v2 Masters Weekly that Complexity put on for somewhere in the neighborhood of 16 or 17 weeks that I did it. And one of the constant things that I got out of that community, which was a lot larger community than I originally thought it was. I regularly had a couple hundred viewers who were just people who were fans of team games. But one of the biggest complaints that always came out of that community was there was like no good 2v2 maps. And about the only 2v2 map that was played on that wasn't just a default Blizzard map was Citadel of Gaia, I believe. I can't remember off the top of my head who created that map, but I can look it up really quick for the audience.
Citadel. I think that might have been Prodigy.
That's Prodigy.
Yeah, and that was basically the only actual like mapper-made map that was actually in the map pool. Everything else was like Scorched Haven by Blizzard, Twilight Fortress by Blizzard, and they had some terrible problems on those maps. I'm just going to say that outright. So what is you guys' opinion? What I'm really looking for, I guess, in talking about the 2v2 maps briefly, is a lot of people complain that there's not a lot of good 2v2 maps. Not a lot of people make them. Why is it that most mappers tend to avoid the 2v2 maps, and is there a future in doing it potentially, and what would help to incentivize mappers to make more 2v2 maps?
Recognition and motivation. We could make it, but it feels like there's no reward to it because we're not sure if it's even going to be played. It's already pretty hard to get your 1v1 maps played, so 2v2 maps, there's no official, no one has requested it in the way that if you create a 2v2 map, then we will guarantee that it's going to be played. We haven't really had that before. There was a point where we had it, we talked about it in the Planetary Workshop, that someone was talking about getting some 2v2 maps, and everybody started making them, but then we didn't hear anymore, and nobody completed the maps. Because, well, why bother? So I think that if someone would reach out and say, you know, create these maps and we will use them, then there will definitely be someone who will make them.
Yeah, to touch up on that, like, there's no reason to make 2v2 maps. There's absolutely no reason at all. If I can think of any reason whatsoever to make a 2v2 map, it's because, well, these 20 people who sit in a big circle, they just all look at each other and be like, Blizzard doesn't make any 2v2 maps. They don't care about team games. Like, alright, that's your reason.
There's a lot of players who play 2v2 on the ladder, though. I've played a bit with my friend, and I've never been more than 10 seconds in the queue. But no one would use the custom 2v2 maps, because they're not in the ladder.
So I guess the question would be, obviously there's some organizations that have some 2v2 stuff. I'm pretty sure at a time that the Evil Geniuses Master Cup was having a 2v2 game. I know CSL always has a 2v2 game with the college end of the tournaments. There's always at least one 2v2 game in the tournament. So there is some competitive outriggings there for the competitive scene of 2v2. So I guess the question is it on these leagues and stuff that do have some 2v2 competition to contact the map making community to be like, hey, we want new 2v2 maps, if you make them, we'll use them? Or is some of the blame and some of the emphasis needing to come from Blizzard in supporting that scene just as well as they've been starting to support the 1v1 scene?
We can't do anything to jumpstart that kind of support. We can hold team maps for map of the month, but what's that going to do?
Right.
Like, honestly, I don't even know of a single tournament, besides maybe Playhem, that might run a 2v2 map. Like, you just don't see it. And I've heard that, you know, there were professional teams that play team games, but
yeah,
like,
CSL.
you never hear about that,
games.
though. Yeah, but you never hear about it, so it's like...
even if it's just a fun thing like at the MOG,
Yeah.
it still happens. It happens all the time, but there hasn't never been really a call out for custom maps. They're like, okay, we'll just use whatever we have available.
Right.
There even are a few good 2v2 maps available. If they bothered to look, they could look at Prodigy's maps. They are ton better than the ladder maps. But they didn't even bother to look at what actually was available. They just took what was on the ladder and used that. So
yeah, team leagues and tournaments and stuff like that, and even Blizzard, like they need to start showing a demand for team competition. And when that starts happening, then we can start churning out team maps. Because honestly, I've tried to make a team map before, and they are actually really fun. Because the layouts are so much more broad and so much more open to discover. Because like you can put two mains next to each other, or you can separate them. You can put them on the same platform. Like you can just do all kinds of stuff with team games that you couldn't do with a 1v1 map. So, but right now it's like there's no reason to. Like people complain that there's not enough team maps being made, or that they're not being made whatsoever by Blizzard. But that doesn't motivate us to do anything about that. Like there's no reason to do it, and we know that when we make a team map, it's not going to go anywhere.
So really, if any of the current tournaments that are using 2v2 as part of their tournament, such as the Collegiate Star League that has at least one 2v2 game with the matchups, and with maybe some of the other tournament outrigging there that have done some 2v2, if they really wanted new maps, the biggest key would be to probably contact guys who are already making maps and post a need for it, so that you guys have an incentive. That shows that it's for sure going to get played by people if you guys take the time to create a nice team map. Then the incentive would be there for you guys to actually do it, versus right now where there is a little bit of an outcry in that scene of people who love the team games for better maps, but there's not been enough of an incentivization by either Blizzard or the organizers of the leagues to actually make you guys get out of bed and go, I want to make a team map today.
Yeah, like I know that Team Crux, or maybe just Ella's Prime, as far as I know, like he made a couple team maps, but they didn't.
Versus free.
Yeah, they didn't go anywhere. It's like I just don't see the point right now. There's no one demanding team maps, or anything like that. Like I know a lot of people play team games. I played a lot of team games back in Brood War. Like they're fun, but there was never really any new map even back then. So like I totally understand and sympathize with people today who want more team maps, but there's no follow-up with it. There's nothing that demands team maps. So why? We make maps for free and because we love it, but I don't think we love it enough to where it's not going to go anywhere.
Right.
Like that's just a fact,
Well,
people want competitive 1v1 maps, and if it doesn't go anywhere then we can learn from that, but it's like, yeah, so.
Well, and some of it, and I think this is a good point that a lot of people make too, is that obviously Blizzard hasn't really cared too much about balancing the 2v2 scene. There was, like, I think in the history of all the changes, the StarCraft 2, the only time they actually made a change that affected 2v2 was they blamed a large part of the Reaper nerf on 2v2 balance. And that's been essentially, as far as I know, one of the only major changes they've made that related back to 2v2 at all, as far as balance changes and balancing the game goes. Otherwise, they focus mostly on 1v1. So I guess it would be safe to say that as far as people who enjoy playing 2v2 maps, unless the leagues and such want to come out and actually request the maps from the map makers, give them a reason to make it, it's probably not going to happen, because it's obvious that when you look at where Blizzard's going with the game and their support for the different scenes, that until there's a lot more support for the 2v2 and support for team games, that the mappers probably aren't going to pick it up unless somebody gives them a really good reason to.
Yeah. Like some guys here in chat are saying that, well, 2v2 is hard to balance, and it's not about balance. Like, no map is completely and 100% balanced. Daybreak is not 100% balanced. Like, whether you want to believe that or not. Like, you know, like I've said this before in a couple episodes ago, like the teeter totter will always sway to one side wherever the wind blows. Like that's just the way it goes. So it has nothing to do with balance. It's like I said, there's just no demand for it. There's no teams out there that are getting featured. No one talks about teams. No one cares about teams. That's just the way it is, and there's no reason that doesn't motivate us any more than it does before to make team games or team maps.
Alright guys, so I'm going to actually wrap up this topic, so I just wanted to briefly touch on it, because I think it was worth mentioning to the community why you don't see the 2v2 maps, right? Like, get you guys' perspective on why you don't see too many 2v2 maps coming out, and maybe just make those suggestions to the community that if they really care deeply enough about team games, you need to find a way to incentivize the map makers to make you new maps. So make sure that, like, if, say, you're part of the CSL and you're out there and you want to see better 2v2 maps, find a way to make the map makers want to do it. Give them a prize for making a great 2v2 map that would be included in your tournament or whatever. And maybe you'll see it happen, because I kind of suspected that the lack of the upside for 2v2 maps was the reason why it doesn't happen. But I think coming from you guys' mouth, it gives that better perspective for everybody out there who does enjoy the team game scene, because I know there's definitely a following out there, even if it's nowhere near as big as the 1v1 scene. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion and see some people have already posted a couple of questions up for us to answer. I'm going to actually go to the very first question, and I think I can reword this in a way that'll make sense to you guys. Unvil God was asking, are there any underused aesthetics, styles, or texture sets that you think are underused? And I think what he was asking with that question is quite simply, obviously there's a lot of different types of tile sets in the games. You have cities, you have jungles, you have deserts, you have beach themes, you have winter themes, some of which are more complicated than others to make, since we know at least a few of them have used custom
textures?
Not widgets, the doodads that don't really translate into the whole ladder experience. Is there, in you guys' opinion, any of those type of aesthetic tile sets that are underused that you think we should see more of, or do you guys feel like there is a pretty good balance between the different tile sets that everybody uses?
I think lava maps in general, like lava, char, those types of maps. People say that they're really dark, but it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe they're not dark to me,
hard to
but
make because they easily get so ugly. They really do. It's really hard to make a good-looking lava map, I think.
Like, what's wrong with making a char or a lava map and then just putting like a different map's lighting on it? Like, that won't change a whole lot. It'll just make it a little bit brighter here or something like that.
But the textures on our settings are very dark. Okay, I remember the ulnar hull number 3 texture, the tiny hexagons, is really dark in low settings. So I personally will avoid this texture in all my maps. And I think it's the same for a lot of chart textures, like the rock, which is really dark, nearly black. So they are not good textures.
So would you guys say that some of that might just come down to, hopefully in the future, Blizzard altering some of those tile sets that are a little bit more dark and difficult to make good, to see more of them used, like say the lava, like you guys were talking about, or is that just something where you just probably won't ever see that many lava maps?
I don't see why you couldn't just adjust the lighting on lava maps. I think it's just maybe just a bad design part on Blizzard, or I don't know, but obviously if they're adding like different tile sets and snow textures in Heart of the Swarm, like there's no reason whatsoever that they can't help fix the lava stuff. Like, I don't know.
Well, it should be easy. I mean, you can still just import textures from the tile sets and use lava, but I don't know. Maybe people are just too lazy to experiment with that. That hasn't really been a great looking map just yet. And people haven't really been given that much focus.
I think that makes pretty good sense. I'm going to actually move on to our next question now. I believe it was Siriox asking about what happened to the FRB thing, any news from Blizzard or something. We did have somebody post, of course, a a topic to the main thread that, at least on occasion, gets updated. I believe. Has there been anything that you guys have heard from your end about anything that's happening with the fewer resource base movement, so to speak? Or is that something that we're kind of just waiting to see if it ever gets picked up at all?
You know, honestly, back in episode 1, I had mentioned that I emailed Blizzard and said, hey, this is the FRB that's going on. What do you guys think? And they said it was interesting. And they asked about how a spectator experiences with it. And honestly, since last season, I just haven't really paid attention to it. It just seems kind of like that less people are in the channel playing it, and just losing interest because it's not necessarily going anywhere. Like the FRB tournament, that got a lot of hype, but afterwards it's like, okay, like, all right, like I don't know, it's just kind of fallen off the grid a little bit, and I haven't heard anything back from Blizzard, and no one else is really talking about it. So,
how did I mean, I don't know. I didn't get a chance to check it out. Did anybody actually get to check out what happened with the FRB tournament and how people's reactions were to it? So I think they played it, right?
Mm-hmm. It was, it definitely had, it proved that the theory about smaller armies were correct. I felt like the map still had a long way to go. They were not correctly designed for it. They were too big, so it kind of gave these awkward situations where lots of base trades and a lot of timing attacks into the games because people don't know the timings. That's what happened like when StarCraft 2 first was released, that everybody died to time attacks because nobody knew them. That was the same that happened in the FRB. So the games weren't really exciting, but I feel like they proved the point that lesser minerals does bring more excitement to the game. It really brings more focus on small groups of armies, which is definitely in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading through the thread a little while ago, and someone had mentioned that you would think, I think people are sometimes getting kind of fooled that, oh, it's all about smaller skirmishes more often in FRB, but the thing is, if anyone watches GSL or DreamHack or something like that, you see those skirmishes all the time, because those are high caliber players. That doesn't change. The better you get, the more scouting you do and the more skirmishes you get. Like, it's really no different. I think what it kind of boils down to is just unit design. Like, you know, I don't know. Like, a lurker, for example, would probably make FRB so much more fun. But we don't have the lurker, so I don't know. I think FRB
kind of lurker-esque.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody about the Swarm Host. Right now, that thing you can put at mid-map on a map like Shattered Temple, and the Swarmlings will make it all the way to the natural on cross positions. So it's got some distance.
Well, that was in the first version, right? The one, the first one?
That's the last I heard from the not-to-be-named sources that I have, is that it's actually still a pretty long-range unit at this point in time. So there's some of that still that could be coming up in the horizon that could actually make some of these ideas work a little better, obviously. But I think it was an interesting question just to kind of get you guys' opinion on where FRB is right now. I think it's worth noting, since we were talking about that, they do have their finals coming up on May 4th, which is going to be 2 days from now at 8 p.m. Eastern. So if you guys want to actually check out what's going on with the FRB stuff, that would be your time to do it. I don't see where the stream is listed. It says Cyber Sports TV. Pull SC stream. I don't see a direct link to it in the chat or in the thread itself. But obviously, you guys can go ahead and try and check out when that is. I don't know if it'll be listed on TL or not in the events calendar, but I would assume with the $200 grand prize and the players that are going to be playing in the final, which I believe is Gonzi and Vibe? Yes, Gonzi and Vibe, that it should be at least interesting to watch, just even if you want to see Gonzi and Vibe play, because they're pretty good players. So we'll see how that ends up working out. So make sure you guys, if you want to, check that out then. I want to actually go to the last question I'm going to take today, because I actually like the back end of this question. Matthew Mega was asking a question, and I'm going to actually avoid the front end of this question.
I raised my hand because I wanted to ask you about that question.
You can ask me about that question in a minute, but it's one of those questions that I don't like touching, because I have opinion that kind of goes past that type of stuff. He was asking about I'm going to touch on the back end of the question first, and then if we want to, we can discuss the front end of the question in a second. But he said, how important do you think actively keeping up a level of play and metagame knowledge is for a map maker? And I am curious what you guys think about that.
It is pretty important. I think every map maker has to have a pretty decent amount of knowledge to keep up with map making. Like we've discussed this over the course of a couple episodes before, but it's really more of like, okay, if I play 10 games as Zerg and no other games as Terran or Protoss, and then I want to get into competitive map making, it's going to be very challenging because I won't know or understand how effective force fields are, and I won't really know how open a certain area might need to be so that force fields aren't too powerful in that area. Or, you know, just little things like that. Or it's like, well, I've never played Terran, so I don't know how wide this ramp needs to be for them to wall it off. Or, you know, just little things like that. Yeah.
Anybody else have any opinions on how they feel playing the game actively challenges them as a map maker? Of course, I have two more of you here. So, I mean, how much do you guys actually play the game, and do you feel like you either benefit from playing more or it wouldn't matter?
Well, I don't play too much. I do play a bit to keep in touch with the game and stuff. Mostly, I get my knowledge from watching tournaments. But I feel like it really helps playing the game a little. You can watch a lot, but you don't really get a feeling for it if you aren't actually playing those maps. Those little things, you just time it out better. It just feels better to play it a little. But the whole metagame thing doesn't really change. It doesn't really affect how I'm playing because I'm playing at a not too high level. Let's put it like that. So metagame, that's not really a thing for me. But you really gotta know how the metagame is if you make maps. There was a time when Protoss didn't forge expand every time. Now every map, you gotta be able to make them forge expandable. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things like that. You just have to. The maps right now are vastly different from the maps a year ago, and some of the things are due to the metagame. Sure, there's a lot of how we have evolved as map makers, but there are some things in the metagame that you need to keep up with.
Yeah, and you know, when it's better if you play more than one race as well. I was just talking with a Godling in chat, and he's saying, you know, does biasm have a role in map creation? And it's really more of like, you got to think outside the box. You got to think about the play styles of each race. I play Zerg and Terran, and as I've mentioned on a previous episode, Terran and Protoss play very similar in how they expand and set up their bases and all that kind of stuff. So you start thinking that, and the fact that I play Zerg, and start thinking like, well, will this work here and will that work there for this race? And you know, you start giving maps advantages and disadvantages for every race in every area of the map. And so, yes, you should keep up with certain things in the metagame, as Art Bill said. It's just better if you have that knowledge, because then you can understand the playstyles and you can understand, oh, this ramp right here needs to be this wide because this is where I know more attacks will be. So it needs to be this wide so that you can wall it off, and you know, just you have to start thinking critically like that with every part of the map. And I think that's one of the reasons why map making in general is just a lot harder than people make it out to be.
I remember some people are asking me if I play Zerg because A lot of people think Cloud Kingdom is very not Zerg friendly, and there's like an anti-bias I made for Cloud Kingdom.
So what's the answer to the question?
Yeah, that's a question. You mostly need to know the broad scheme of what happens in the game and in each matchup. It's important to play. Just like Rugby said, you have to feel the gameplay. And,
So you definitely aren't going to
appreciate.
be hurt by playing the game at a high level, but you need to have the understanding of the metagame more than you necessarily need to be able to play one race at a really high level if you want to be successful in map making.
Yeah.
It seems like the overarching opinion I'm getting from most of you guys. So you have to have
Mostly,
an awareness
yeah.
of where the metagame is and what all three races need to be successful in the game, more so than you necessarily need to be able to get on ladder and be grandmasters.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then if you want, Travis, I will, before we wrap up the show, allow you to ask me the front end of the question. But now you're
Oh, no. I raised my hand because I wanted to say, can you ask that question?
Can you ask that question? I think you can.
That
You
no,
definitely can.
Matt asked that question.
Oh, okay.
I raised my hand because I thought you were going to go straight to shout out, and I was like, no,
Oh.
ask his question.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I didn't touch the front end.
Dork!
Hey, calm down. I didn't touch the front end of the question because he was asking at the front end of the question about the post that Cloud made on the forums, which is a debate between, not even a debate, it's a commentary by Cloud on the state of how much money commentators make versus how much money players make. And it was a video blog that Cloud made. So it's just his opinions on the subject and how he feels about it.
He's jealous.
Yeah.
What? Did I do something?
He's jealous that casters make a lot of money.
Well, right. He was insinuating. He in his blog, he felt like the players weren't getting enough of the credit compared to commentators in the StarCraft 2 scene. Now, being a commentator in the StarCraft 2 scene, I can tell you that I have made, if anything, negative money thus far. So, if I'm getting paid too much, then apparently I need to start paying people, from my point of view. But I know he was talking about more at the higher end. So
yeah,
I didn't really touch that.
Player.
I didn't really touch that part of the topic, largely because, I mean, I always just, my cop-out for this topic, because I have a cop-out answer pretty much, is that if you look at competitive gaming now, it's kind of like if you looked at professional football in America in like the 1920s and the 1930s. There's a handful of people who make a lot of money right now, and then there's basically everybody else who doesn't make anything or they make very little. Whether it's map makers, referees, tournament organizers, people who run entire websites, these guys here with me, myself, or players. It doesn't matter who you are. There's like probably like 6 or 7 casters in the world making a good living. There's probably somewhere around 10 players in the world making a good living, and then there's everybody else not making really anything at all. And that's kind of how it was when you go back and you look at like the NFL in the 1920s and 30s. All the players worked 9-to-5 jobs, and they played football on the weekends, and some of it was on radio and whatnot because they just loved doing it, and that's why they did it. And it became this big, huge national thing where all these people are employed as referees, hot dog vendors, commentators, players, coaches. All those positions grew out of the growth of it. And really, competitive gaming is in its infancy, if you really think about it. I mean, gaming around in general has only been around since like the 70s. So we're just barely over 40 years that games have existed, electronic games, let alone the competitive scene, which really didn't start to blossom, I feel, until the 90s. So we're really into like the second half of maybe like somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 years of competitive gaming. Where it started to make a move towards the forefront. So, I mean, we're really at the infancy of competitive gaming right now, so even debating who's making more money right now is kind of a fruitless topic, because right now the majority of people don't make any money anyways, where it's not even worth discussing it, in my opinion, because, I mean, it is what it's going to be. A handful of people are going to make money, and almost everybody else isn't. And it's just the way it's going to be until enough money comes into competitive gaming to bring everybody from the lowest guy up to a point where at least the bare minimum, the lowest guy can make a living off of being involved with competitive gaming, be him a referee, a commentator, a league organizer, a map designer, or whatever. Until all these people start making at least like, 30 grand a year or something like that, where they can feasibly feed themselves, it's all kind of moot to get into, oh, I think this guy makes more money than that guy, and I think that's wrong because that guy should be making more money. It's kind of a pointless discussion because we're not really at that point yet where I think we should be too worried about it. There's my
We'll have to
soapbox
make
moment
30
for
grand
today.
making that.
It would be, wouldn't it? Right? I'm sure all these guys would love to get paid at least 30 grand a year to make maps.
Oh man, I would quit my job in a heartbeat.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's what I care about more when anybody ever asks me about those type of topics. Is what I care about is that the foundation of competitive gaming gets built up to a better place than it is now, where it's not a passion play for people that they do outside of their 9-to-5 job, where competitive gaming, for the foundation of it, can become everybody's 9-to-5 job. That would be ideally what I want to see. I could care less if a commentator or a player is the highest paid person in the scene. I care more that the foundation starts to get to a level where you can say, I'm going to do competitive gaming as a job, and it actually makes sense, and people don't look at you like you're out of your darn mind.
Yeah.
So anyways, guys, that's going to wrap up for Q&A today. Glad everybody asked some pretty good questions there. And I think we've had a pretty good time. So let's move to our shout-outs, though, and closing thoughts for the day today. So we're going to start out... I'm gonna mix things up a little bit. We almost always start with Superhuman, because he's quiet a lot of times. But I'm going to start with our more talkative man of the day, Iron Man.
With me first?
You first?
Yeah.
Ooh! Okay. Yeah, I got a new Twitter. It's like right here, I think. So, yeah, just follow me on that. I haven't tweeted recently, but I usually will about just new maps or when Mapper's show goes on. If I map stream, which that won't happen for a little while because the 24/7 rebroadcast is kind of screwing me over. But well, yeah, just follow me on Twitter. ESV Korean Weekly is starting in about 24 minutes on Twitch TV /ESVision. So tune into that. It'll be really great today. Okay, who's next?
Go ahead. Superhuman, you go ahead, and then I'll hit up Archville last.
So you can follow me on Twitter at ESV_superhuman and not human or something. And thank you for watching. Argyle, your turn.
Alright, don't follow me on Twitter because I never tweet. Just want to give a shout out to my mapmaking team, the Planetary Workshop, the best mapmaking team, without a doubt. And yeah, that's about it.
Alright, guys, and then of course you guys can follow me at GoForNursky on Twitter. I actually do tweet, so if you follow me, I will tweet quite a bit. Because I always tweet what I'm going to be up to. Not so much like I just changed my underwear and I'm going to eat a sandwich, but things that I'm going to be doing commentary on, since of course I am a commentator in the StarCraft 2 scene. And I'm actually starting to branch out into some of the other games as well. I've been keeping a pretty close eye on Counter-Strike and League of Legends, and I might start doing some stuff there as well on my YouTube, which is youtube.com/NurskySC. Of course, you guys are watching my stream. I stream some ladder games, and I'm going to be streaming Diablo 3 actually today, and so long as the Diablo 3 beta servers are still up, because I have access to it now. So I'm going to be streaming some Diablo 3 so long as the servers are still up later today here on the same channel. And, of course, you guys can follow me on my Twitter. I'll let you guys know what I'm going to be up to. I'll let you guys know updates on Mappers. If you have any kind of suggestions for our show, feedback at all, please visit the official TL Mappers thread, which I will link into the chat. And I'll try and remember to put into the show notes, as usual, for the VOD of it. For any kind of suggestions, feedback, anything you guys want to tell us about, or you can go ahead and tweet it at myself as well. And I take most suggestions very seriously as far as what you guys want to see in the show. and topic suggestions and all that kind of stuff. So for now, guys, though, we're going to be getting out of here. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in today. Thank you very much for Archville for being our special guest, filling in for Prodigy today. And, of course, thank you to Iron Man and Super Ooman and everybody from ESV and TPW and all the map makers out there who make games a lot more interesting by making some great maps. So we'll see you guys on the next show later for now.
Bye, guys. Bye, Ragu. Love you.
See you.
The obligatory talk over the outro. Wouldn't be a show if we didn't do it. One of these days, you guys, I swear. One of these days.